Hi everybody, it's Miss Smith. I am back with some more Chocolate Fever, reading in my kitchen today, and I'm right by Peanut and Pepper's food bowl and water bowl, so you might hear them coming by for a little snack, and maybe they will say hello during our time. All right, so we know that Henry has his teacher has taken him to the nurse's office at school, and we know that he left off with all of the little brown spots starting to pop and get bigger. And we're going to start with chapter 5, Calling Dr. Fargo. In later years, Henry couldn't remember who screamed first. All he could recall was that both he and Mrs. Kimblefarber were yelling their heads off, and that Nurse Molly Farthing was as cool as a cantaloupe. Apparently, cantaloupes are cool. "Calm down now, both of you," she said. "Mrs. Kimblefarber, you go and call Mrs. Green on the telephone. Tell her we're taking Henry to the city hospital." Mrs. Kimblefarber didn't move. She just stood there with her mouth open, staring at Henry. I would probably be doing the same thing. "You scoot now," insisted Nurse Farthing in a stern tone. "Shush! Off with you, Mrs. Kimblefarber." "And you, Henry Green," she said as Mrs. Kimblefarber left the room, "are coming with me. Let us go. Quietly, calmly." She took his hand, and once again, Henry noticed that it felt good and somehow made him feel better. He kept holding her cool hand as they left the school, all the way to the hospital as the taxi sped along. Henry held fast to the calm, steady hand of Nurse Molly Farthing. In fact, it wasn't until he had been checked by 2 different doctors and was waiting to be examined by the hospital's chief of children's medicine, Dr. Fargo, that he dared to let her hand go. So he's feeling pretty scared. I would feel the same way. I would feel pretty scared. What? Said Dr. Fargo as he came bounding into the examining room. He was a small, round man with a bushy white mustache and a confused look on his face. "What do we have here? Oh boy, looks like he fell in a mud puddle." He leaned down so close to Henry's nose that Henry could smell his puffy breath. It smelled like peppermints. "Didn't fall in a mud puddle, did you, lad?" "No, sir, I did not." "Didn't think so," said Dr. Fargo. "Too bad. Would have explained what those big brown spots are all over you if you had." "Well then," he said, turning to Nurse Molly Farthing, "tell me things." Well, you're not going to believe this, Doctor," Nurse Farthing began, and as she told Dr. Fargo about the events of the morning. "I am not going to believe this," Dr. Fargo repeated when she had finished. "It's, well, impossible. No rash in the whole history of rashes ever appeared so fast, or grew so big, or popped out with a noise you could actually hear. This is impossible." "Well," said Nurse Farthing, "it happened." "Well, so I see," he said. "Well, we'll soon get to the bottom of this, or my name's not, what is my name again, by the way?" Dr. Fargo, I believe," said Henry tentatively. "Oh, pleased to meet you, son," said Dr. Fargo, and he shook Henry's hand. "Ought to do something about those big brown spots, though." "Yes, sir, yes," said Henry, who was beginning to feel a little confused himself. Dr. Fargo took Henry to the examining table and switched on the big light. For a full 5 minutes, he said nothing but, as he poked and prodded Henry. He looked at every big brown spot and at all the bare spots in between the brown spots. He looked with a magnifying glass and without a magnifying glass. In Henry's eyes, he looked in Henry's ears, in his nose, and even under his tongue. Finally, he said, "I don't know any more than when I started." Ooh, that doesn't sound good. "They look just like your typical big brown spots, except, of course, in the whole history of the civilized world, there has never been a case of big brown spots before." "Oh, I'm feeling a little frightened," said Henry. I'm Dr. Fargo, said the doctor. That much I know. But what I'd like to do is get to know more about those brown spots of yours. He wet the tip of a cotton swab and he brushed it gently against one of the big brown spots on Henry's right arm. Ouch, said Henry. Oh, did that hurt? No, said Henry. Then why did you say ouch? Because, said Henry, I thought it was gonna hurt, so I just said ouch anyway. I see, said Dr. Fargo, shaking his head. He put the cotton swab into a glass jar. Take this to the laboratory at once, he said to one of his assistants, and the man rushed out of the room. In a few minutes, we'll know more about those big brown spots of yours, the doctor said. Hands behind his back, he began to pace the room. So when he's pacing, he's walking back and forth, back and forth. Suddenly, he stopped, his nose in the air. Who's been eating a candy bar in my office? He demanded. No one answered. Dr. Fargo's nose twitched from side to side and he sniffed the air. I smell candy, he said. Somebody's been eating a candy bar in my office. Just then, the telephone rang and Dr. Fargo bounded across the room to answer it. What? What? He said into the phone. Are you sure? What? His white mustache bounced up and down as Dr. Fargo sank slowly into a chair. He put the telephone down, a look of amazement on his face. Chocolate, he said. Those big brown spots are pure chocolate. Chocolate? Gasped Nerth Farthing. Chocolate? Exclaimed Henry Green. Chocolate, echoed Dr. Fargo's two assistants. Exactly, said Dr. Fargo. The boy, it seems, is nothing more than a walking chocolate bar. And here's a picture of Henry laying there in his underwear covered with brown spots. And then here's a picture of the doctors and the assistants. Uh-oh. It sounds like the mailman just came. Boys and girls, this is why pets should be watching television in the bedroom when we get together. Let's try chapter 6. Catch that boy. There was more excitement than Henry had ever seen. All kinds of doctors were examining him now, poking and prodding as if he were not a boy, but a pincushion. And Dr. Fargo was bounding about the room, talking about chocolate fever, a new disease, making medical history, and things like that. Henry was tired, and Henry was afraid. He wanted to be left alone. He wanted all the doctors to just go away. He wanted to be home. He wanted, in fact, to be just about any place in the world except this hospital. So he did something very simple, something his heart told him he had to do to survive. He jumped off the examining table and began to run. In a flash, he had bolted through the doorway and was running down the long corridor. Behind him, he heard shouts of, "Stop and catch that boy!" Two nurses at the end of the corridor tried to catch him, but Henry was simply too quick. He dodged past them and darted down the stairway. Down, down, down he went, down 3 whole flights of stairs and out into the main lobby of the hospital. Ahead of him, a guard at the door held out an arm. Running as fast as he could, Henry crashed through his grasp and into the street. Without pausing to think where he was headed, Henry ran. As he was about to turn the corner, he looked back. There was a whole army of people rushing him. Doctors in white coats, nurses, guards blowing whistles, policemen waving their arms. And behind them, he could see Dr. Fargo. Henry didn't wait to see any more. "Legs," he said, "don't fail me now." And with that, he turned the corner and took off down the street. He ran and ran and ran until he had no breath left, and then he ran some more. His legs flashing in the afternoon sun, Henry darted down one street and up another. He had no idea where he was. He had no idea of where he was going, but he still kept running. People stared at him as he whizzed by. A few even raised their hands as if to stop him or say something, but Henry kept right on running. After a long while, he couldn't see or hear any of the people running after him. I must be pretty far ahead of them by now, Henry thought. But suddenly, up ahead at the corner, a police car flashed by with its siren screaming. Ah, they must be after me, he thought with alarm. I'm a wanted man. In my underwear. Sick at heart, Henry pushed himself to run faster. His head hurt, his side hurt, his legs hurt, but he kept on running. His lungs hurt, his eyes hurt, even his hair began to hurt. But Henry, he just kept on running. At last, he could run no more. He was finished, done. He had to rest, and to rest he had to hide. So without thinking about it, Henry ran down a large grassy alley that lay between two white houses. At the end of the alley was a large garage with one door partly open. Henry sneaked in and looked around. There was an automobile parked inside, but not a person in sight. With his last bit of strength, he flopped down on the floor beside the automobile. A fine mess you're in now, he thought to himself. You've run away from a hospital, and police are after you. Your mother must be scared to death with worry, and you have a disease no one has ever heard of before because it is a chocolate fever. The more he thought about his predicament, and predicament is just a big word for big problem, the sadder Henry became, and a lump rose in his throat, and a tear ran down his cheek. A sob escaped from his lips, and guess what? He was crying, sobbing out loud, really, really crying. He cried for a few moments because he was so sad. He cried some more because he was lost. And then he cried for a long, long time because everything had become so hopeless. At last, when he could cry no more, Henry dried his eyes and tried to think out his situation. He would not go back to Dr. Fargo in the hospital. Of that he was certain. Nothing on Earth or any other planet could make him do that. But what if he went home? What would his mother and father do? They would take him back to Dr. Fargo in the hospital. They would have to. Never, Henry said aloud. Never, never, never. And in the dim light of the garage, Henry looked at the big brown spots on his arm and began to hate them. Stupid spots, he thought. Why did you have to happen to me? And feeling angry, he stood up and began to pace around the half-empty garage. I can't go home, he thought, and I won't go back to the hospital. All right then, I'm on my own. Somewhere there must be a place for me, a place to go until these stupid big brown spots disappear, a place that's far away where no one has ever heard of me or the hospital or Dr. Fargo or my parents. Feeling much braver now with things somehow settled in his mind, Henry laid down to rest for a while before setting off on his journey. So, this is taking a very exciting turn. I will be back tomorrow. I want to thank Alejandro from our class for sending me a text reminding me to read from our chapter book. And so thank you, Alejandro, for that. Come here, Pep. Let's say goodbye to everybody. Okay, guys. We'll see you the next time. Come here, Peanut. Come here. All right. They both want to have a turn. Come here, Peanut. Come on. Come on. All right. Let's get Peanut. So, guys, we'll see you tomorrow. Miss you. And I wish that I had a doggy babysitter.